3 minutes ago, Jamie Raskin walked into that hearing room carrying a file so thick that it actually made the security scanner beep twice. The guards exchanged a quick look. One of them leaned toward the other and whispered something under his breath. Raskin simply smiled. Then he tapped the enormous file in his hand and delivered 5 words that would soon be repeated across news channels everywhere. "This ends today, gentlemen. Everything." And sitting at the witness table was Kash Patel, wearing that same stone-cold expression he was known for. The mask he had mastered so well. But for just 1 second, that mask slipped. It cracked. And the cameras caught it. Everyone caught it. Let me set the scene. It was the Senate Intelligence Committee, room 216, at 9:47 a.m. The hearing room was already packed by the time Raskin arrived. Every seat was occupied. Journalists were lined along the back wall, and cameras had been positioned from nearly every possible angle. But there was one thing nobody in that room seemed prepared for. Raskin had not come alone. 3 assistants walked in behind him, each carrying an identical black case. They placed the cases carefully on the table in front of Raskin's seat. Click, click, click. All 3 cases opened at almost exactly the same time. And inside? Stacks upon stacks of documents. Red tabs. Yellow tabs. Green tabs. The filing system was so precise and organized that it looked as though someone had been preparing it for months. Patel watched. His lawyers watched. And if you paid close enough attention, you could see the realization cross their faces. That brief moment when they understood they had just walked into something they were not prepared to handle. For the first 20 minutes, however, everything followed standard procedure. Other senators took their turns asking questions. Counterterrorism budgets, cyber threat assessments, national security concerns. Patel handled each question with his usual efficiency. Short answers, very few details. Keep the clock moving. He checked his watch twice. At times, he almost looked bored. Then Raskin took the microphone. "Director Patel." The entire room shifted. There is really no other way to describe it. The atmosphere changed instantly. People straightened in their seats. Cameras refocused. Even the stenographer briefly looked up from her keyboard. "Well, I want to talk about a package that was delivered to my office 36 hours ago." Patel's expression barely moved. He had heard accusations like this before. Anonymous sources, leaked documents, conspiracy theories. He already seemed to have his standard response prepared. "Senator, I am not aware of any specific." "I am not asking if you are aware." Raskin opened the first file. "Why, I am telling you what I found." He reached inside and began explaining what had been delivered to his office. The package contained a USB drive. That drive contained 2,300 pages of internal FBI correspondence covering the period from June 2019 through February 2025. Raskin stopped for a moment. Let that number sink in. 2,300 pages. 6 years of emails, memorandums, directives, and reports, all originating from inside the organization. And according to Raskin, those documents were all connected to what he described as a systematic cover-up of the Epstein investigation. The room went completely silent. Not the polite kind of silence that happens when people are simply waiting for the next person to speak. This was different. It was the heavy, suffocating silence that takes over when people hear something they cannot simply unhear. Patel leaned forward slightly. "Senator, I categorically reject any characterization of the FBI's handling of—" "You can reject it all you want." Raskin reached into the file and pulled out the first document. "But that will not change what is written here." He held it up. "No, document 1. He read the date. June 14th, 2019. Then he identified the source. FBI Miami Field Office to FBI Headquarters. And then the subject line. Epstein investigation, high-profile targets. Raskin positioned the document so the cameras could clearly see it. In this email, the Miami office reports that they have identified 34 individuals connected to Jeffrey Epstein's operation. He continued. They have witness testimony. They have flight records. They have foot records. They have photographic evidence. And they are requesting permission to open formal investigations into these 34 names. He placed the document back on the table. Then he looked directly at Patel. Do you know what the response was, Director Patel? Patel said nothing. Raskin continued. The response came 3 days later from FBI headquarters. He read the key portion. Not advisable at this time. Recommend holding pending further review. The response, according to the document, had been signed by the deputy director. Raskin looked back toward Patel. 34 names. Evidence already in hand. And headquarters said, Wait. He paused. That was 2019. 6 years ago. His voice sharpened. How long exactly were they supposed to wait? One of Patel's lawyers, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, leaned toward him and quietly whispered something. Patel gave the slightest shake of his head. No. He was going to deal with this himself. Senator, decisions about investigative priorities involve complex considerations. Raskin cut straight through the explanation. Let me show you how complex it got. He reached for another document. Document 2. He looked down at the date. August 10th, 2019. Then he emphasized the timing. 1 week after Jeffrey Epstein's death. He pulled out another internal email. FBI internal memo from the deputy director to all field offices. The subject line read, Epstein matters. Case closure. Raskin began reading the document. Effective immediately, the Epstein case is considered closed. All subsidiary investigations are to be suspended. All evidence is to be transferred to headquarters for archival purposes. He stopped. Then he looked around the room. Archival purposes? His tone changed. That is FBI language for bury it and forget it. A low murmur immediately moved through the hearing room. Journalists were typing furiously. Committee members exchanged uneasy looks, and Patel's jaw tightened. It was barely noticeable, but it happened. For just a moment, the tension in his face became impossible to miss. But it gets worse, Raskin said. He turned to another section of the file. 6 months later, in January 2020, before Ghislaine Maxwell had even been arrested, an FBI analyst sent an email to their supervisor. Raskin read directly from the document. We have compiled sufficient evidence to move forward with Maxwell. Why are we delaying? He lowered the paper slightly. Then he read the response. The political sensitivities. We are waiting for clearance. Raskin looked directly at Patel. Political sensitivities. He let the words hang in the room. Whose politics, director? He leaned forward slightly. Who exactly was sensitive about arresting a woman who trafficked children? Silence. Patel's hands were now completely flat on the table. He wasn't moving them. He wasn't gesturing. They simply rested there, almost as though he were trying to physically anchor himself to the table. Raskin moved on. The next document, he said, is from March 2021, after Maxwell's conviction. He pulled out another report. An FBI field agent submits a report. Raskin read the relevant passage. Low subject, Maxwell has provided names of 47 individuals involved in the operation. Recommend immediate investigation. He slowly lowered the paper. Then he pointed toward a specific section. And right there, handwritten in the margin, someone wrote, Raskin paused. Ross not approved. High-level decision. He repeated it. High-level decision. The implication was impossible to miss. Someone at the very top of the FBI, or perhaps even higher, had apparently decided that 47 names connected to a child trafficking operation were not worth investigating. But Raskin was nowhere near finished. Not even close. He reached into another section of the file and pulled out a document that immediately looked different from everything else. It had a red cover sheet. Across the front, in bold lettering, were the words, Top Secret. Raskin held it up. This document, he said, was classified until 72 hours ago, when a federal judge ordered its release. The room became noticeably quieter. Raskin continued. It is dated February 3rd, 2025. Then he looked directly at Patel. 2 weeks after you, Director Patel, took office. He opened the document. Memorandum from the Office of the FBI Director to all field offices and division heads. Then he read the subject. Epstein-related investigations. New operational directives. Raskin began reading slowly, deliberately, making sure every word landed. Effective immediately. All active case files related to the Epstein investigation are to be transferred to FBI headquarters. He continued. No field office is authorized to initiate or continue investigative activities without explicit approval from the director's office. Another line. All scheduled witness interviews are suspended. Then another. All pending document requests are to be denied pending review. Raskin stopped. He looked up. And at the bottom, he turned toward Patel. Director Patel, that is your signature. The room erupted. Not figuratively. Literally. People in the gallery began shouting. Journalists jumped to their feet. Camera operators scrambled to reposition themselves and capture better angles. The committee chairman slammed his gavel against the desk so hard that the sound echoed through the chamber. Order! Order in this chamber! But the commotion continued for several seconds. Patel sat completely frozen. His face had gone white, not merely pale. White. It looked as though every drop of blood had suddenly drained from his face. His lead attorney, a gray-haired man in his 60s, shot to his feet so quickly that his chair scraped loudly across the floor. Mr. Chairman, I must object to this line of... Sit down, counselor. Raskin's voice was cold. Ice cold. Your client can answer for himself. But Patel didn't answer. Instead, he remained seated, staring at the document projected onto the massive screen behind Raskin. His own signature had been enlarged to nearly 10 feet tall. It was impossible for anyone in the room to miss. Director, Raskin said quietly. His voice was almost gentle now. Do you recognize this document? Silence. Raskin waited. Do you recognize your own signature? More silence. Patel's lawyer tried again. Senator, my client needs time to review. Time to review. What time? Raskin stood. This document shut down the Epstein investigation. He began listing the consequences. It stopped witness interviews. It blocked document releases. It killed every active lead the FBI had. Then he pointed directly at Patel. And you signed it the same day you met with White House officials. He paused. The same day. The room seemed to hold its breath. What did they tell you in that meeting, Director Patel? Raskin's voice hardened. What did they ask you to do? For the first time, Patel finally spoke. His voice was quiet, strained. Senator, I was not. Do not tell me you were not part of this. Raskin cut him off immediately. Do not tell me you did not know. He pointed toward the enormous image of the document. Your signature is right there. Then he picked up another document. And here is what happened after you signed that directive. Raskin looked down at the page. FBI activity on Epstein-related investigations dropped by 94%. Witness interviews, 0. Document analysis, 0. Field investigations, 0. He looked directly at Patel. You did not just slow down the investigation, Director. A pause. You killed it. The room fell silent again. And here is the part, Raskin said, reaching for one final document. That should terrify every American watching this. He lifted the document from the file. This is an FBI internal list created in 2021 and updated in 2025 during your tenure. He turned it toward the cameras. It is titled. He read the heading. Individuals excluded from Epstein-related investigative activities. Raskin held it up. 47 names. Then he explained what appeared beside each name. Next to every individual is a code explaining why they were protected. He started with the first category. Code A, political sensitivity. 12 names. Then the second. Code B, diplomatic relations. 8 names. Then the third. Code C, national security concerns. 15 names. And finally, Raskin stopped. He looked down at the page, then back at the room. And code D. He paused. Code D. Another beat of silence. Executive branch protection. 12 names. He let the words settle. The room was completely dead silent. No shouting, no movement, no whispering. You could hear people breathing. Raskin slowly repeated the phrase. Executive branch protection. Then he looked toward Patel. The White House is protecting 12 people connected to Jeffrey Epstein from an FBI investigation. He looked directly at Patel. Was that national security, director, or is that a cover-up? Patel's lawyer immediately stood again. Mr. Chairman, my client invokes his Fifth Amendment right. He will not answer this question or any subsequent questions regarding... The room erupted once again. The Fifth Amendment. The FBI director was taking the Fifth. Raskin simply nodded. Slowly. Almost as though this was exactly what he had expected. Almost as though this was precisely where he had wanted the questioning to lead. The right not to incriminate yourself, Raskin said. He turned away from the witness table and walked back toward his own seat. Then he gathered his documents. Though the FBI director believes that answering questions about the Epstein investigation would incriminate him. He looked toward the cameras. Your FBI director, the man responsible for federal law enforcement, cannot answer questions about a child trafficking investigation because he might incriminate himself. He sat down. These documents will be released to the public tomorrow morning. He paused. All 2,300 pages. Every email. Every email. Every directive. Every protected name. Then Raskin looked at Patel one final time. The truth always comes out, Director. A brief pause. Always. And you just made sure the whole country knows you have been hiding it. The hearing ended 5 minutes later. Technically, it continued. Other senators asked other questions, but nobody was really listening anymore. Nobody cared. Because Jamie Raskin had just done something almost nobody else had been willing to do. He had named the alleged cover-up. He had put the documents in front of the public, and he had forced Patel to invoke the Fifth Amendment during a public congressional hearing concerning a child trafficking investigation. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Cable news networks switched to emergency coverage. Legal experts began debating whether Patel had just committed career suicide. But now, step away from the raw drama inside that hearing room for a moment. Look at what Raskin had actually constructed. Because that 12-minute exchange was not some spontaneous confrontation. It was the visible tip of an investigative structure that had been developing for months. And understanding that structure tells you far more than any single document ever could by itself. Start with the USB drive delivered to Raskin's office 36 hours before the hearing. It was not simply an anonymous tip from some unidentified source. A package of that magnitude. 300 pages of internal FBI correspondence covering 6 years, including a document that had remained classified until a federal judge ordered its release just 72 hours before the hearing. Does not simply appear out of nowhere. There had to be coordination behind it. The federal court order itself was not obtained in 36 hours. That legal process had been initiated beforehand. Raskin's office had apparently been working through a legal process weeks or potentially months earlier, specifically to ensure that the February 3rd memorandum could be released and used during this hearing. And that leads to a critical point. Raskin already knew about the February 3rd memorandum. He already knew about Patel's signature. He knew before he ever walked into that hearing room. Which means the dramatic moment when Patel's signature was projected 10 feet tall was not some discovery made spontaneously in front of the committee. It was a prepared revelation. It had been designed. And it was time for maximum impact, precisely when Patel's earlier denials were already part of the public record. Even the order of the documents was deliberate. They were presented chronologically for a reason. Each document made the next one more damaging. The 2019 Miami field office request established that evidence existed. The response from headquarters established that the investigation had been suppressed. Then the Maxwell delay email suggested that political considerations were involved in that suppression. The handwritten note in 2021 established that the decision had apparently come from higher up. And finally, the February 3rd memorandum, with Patel's signature at the bottom, established that the new director had formally continued and expanded those restrictions from the beginning of his tenure. By the time Raskin revealed the protected names list and its 4 classification codes, the audience had already been taken through a 6-year timeline of alleged deliberate inaction. The list was not introducing an entirely new accusation. It was answering the question the previous documents had already raised. Who exactly was being protected? And under what official justification? Then came the Fifth Amendment. And that final moment was just as calculated as everything that came before it. Raskin did not accidentally corner Patel into invoking his constitutional right. He designed the questioning to reach that point. He built a sequence in which virtually every possible answer created another problem. Any answer could potentially confirm the alleged cover-up, and another answer could potentially create new criminal exposure. By the time the protected names list was sitting on the table, Patel had reached a position where there appeared to be no response that did not potentially place him inside the very conspiracy the documents were describing. His lawyers understood that. The invocation was the only option left, and for the congressional record, that moment carried enormous significance. A sitting FBI director had invoked the Fifth Amendment, the constitutional protection against self-incrimination, during a public Senate hearing concerning a child trafficking investigation. That invocation is now part of the permanent record. It cannot simply be taken back. It cannot later be dismissed as a misunderstanding. And it cannot be reframed as nothing more than some procedural technicality. It is now sitting in the congressional record alongside the 300 pages of documents, alongside the February 3rd memorandum carrying Patel's signature, and alongside the protected names list with its 4 classification codes. The 2,300 pages were scheduled to be released publicly the following morning. Whatever those pages contain, every email, every directive, every alleged suppression order, every protected name, they were now set to become available in their entirety to journalists, legal experts, investigators, and any citizen willing to read through them. And Patel's decision to invoke the Fifth Amendment created another major consequence. He could no longer provide an alternative interpretation of those documents from within the official hearing record. That opportunity was gone the moment his lawyer stood up and said those words. 3 minutes was the opening, 12 minutes was the trap. And the record Raskin assembled, document by document, signature by signature, classification code by classification code, was now permanent. The truth always comes out. Raskin had said those words quietly, almost gently. He said them while gathering his documents. But by that point, he had already ensured that this particular truth, whatever the released documents ultimately showed, would have nowhere left to hide. There is another detail worth examining closely. It is the specific way Raskin chose to present the protected names list. He did not read the names. He read the codes. And that decision was not accidental. If Raskin had openly read the names during a Senate hearing, the proceeding could have immediately faced a series of legal complications. There could have been challenges involving the classification status of the information. There could have been objections from multiple directions. There could have been procedural disputes capable of interrupting the entire sequence he had carefully constructed. Instead, Raskin focused on the codes and the number of individuals assigned to each category. By doing that, he placed the critical information into the permanent record. The existence of the list, the number of individuals allegedly protected, and the official categories being used to justify that protection, all without directly naming the individuals and triggering the procedural defenses that might have followed. But the strategy accomplished something even more important. It gave everyone watching enough information to understand the structure of the alleged protection without revealing the names themselves. And that created an enormous unanswered question. Who are the 12 people classified under Code D? Executive branch protection. That question was now sitting in front of the entire country. Every journalist who examined the document release would want to know. Every congressional investigator would want to know. And every member of the public who opened the documents the following morning would want to know. Raskin did not answer that question. He opened it. And he opened it in the most public and consequential way available to him. Then he stepped back. The documents could do the rest. But among all the documents presented that day, the February 3rd memorandum deserves particular attention, because that is the document that potentially transforms everything that came before it from historical evidence into present-tense accountability. The 2019 Miami field office request, the headquarters response suppressing further action, the Maxwell delay email, the handwritten margin note from 2021. All of those documents predated Patel. Together, they documented a pattern of alleged suppression that stretched across different administrations and different FBI leadership tenures. They were damaging. But by themselves, they did not personally place Patel inside that alleged cover-up. The February 3rd memorandum changed that, at least according to the hearing record. It was issued only 2 weeks into Patel's tenure. It carried Patel's signature. And it formally established, expanded, and institutionalized restrictions that the earlier documents suggested had previously been carried out in a less formal manner. That is precisely why the White House meeting became so important. Raskin established during the hearing, not merely through an accusation, that the February 3rd memorandum was signed on the same day Patel met with White House officials. He did not need to prove what was actually said inside that meeting. Not yet. He only needed to establish the timing. Because once the meeting and the signature were placed next to each other in the official record, one question became unavoidable. What happened during that meeting that resulted in this directive being issued that same day? And Patel had a difficult problem. Any explanation he offered about the timing could potentially be checked against other records. White House visitor logs, meeting schedules, official records, and whatever additional documentation existed concerning the activities of that day. His lawyers understood exactly where that line of questioning could lead. That is why the Fifth Amendment invocation was not necessarily a spontaneous reaction made in panic. It was the planned response to the question Raskin had deliberately constructed the hearing to reach. Because by the time the entire sequence had been laid out, there was no easy answer left. Now comes the question of the 47 protected individuals. What happens to them depends heavily on what those 2,300 pages actually contain when they are examined in full. The 4 classification codes are not casual labels. Political sensitivity, diplomatic relations, national security concerns, executive branch protection. They are official designations. And that means they were assigned by specific individuals inside the FBI at specific points in time for specific documented reasons. The real question is what those documents say about those decisions and who made them. Those reasons are contained within the files. The individuals who applied those designations can be identified. The dates when those designations were created can be cross-referenced against the larger timeline of the investigation, the events unfolding around the Epstein and Maxwell proceedings at the time, and any communications that may have taken place between the FBI and outside parties before or after each designation was applied. The 47 names and their corresponding codes are only the beginning. They are not the end of the investigation. And Raskin understood that when he read those codes aloud. He was not presenting a final conclusion. He was handing the public a key. And, just as importantly, he was putting on the public record the fact that the key existed. That meant no one could later claim they did not know. No one could simply point to bureaucratic confusion and argue that the door could not be opened. The door was there. The key was now in public view. Kash Patel remained seated at that witness table, still wearing the stone-cold expression he had carried throughout the hearing. And he had just watched 12 minutes dismantle 6 years of institutional protection. He watched his own signature appear 10 feet tall on the screen behind Raskin. He watched a senator identify the classification codes that allegedly explained why 47 people connected to a child trafficking operation had never been investigated. And then came the question that mattered most. Explain it. Patel did not. He invoked his constitutional right against self-incrimination. And that decision will follow him. It is already part of the official record. It cannot simply be revised. It cannot be retracted. And it cannot be rewritten after the fact. An FBI director invoked the Fifth Amendment rather than answer questions concerning a child trafficking investigation. That sentence is now part of the permanent historical record of the United States Congress. Whatever happens next, that moment is not going anywhere. Whatever the document release reveals, whatever investigations may follow, whatever legal proceedings could emerge, that sentence will remain. And it may become the opening line of whatever history ultimately records about Kash Patel's tenure at the FBI. 3 minutes to announce it. 12 minutes to prove it. 1 sentence to end it. Raskin gathered his documents without rushing. He looked at Patel one final time. And then he said exactly what he had come there to say. The truth always comes out. And this time, he had made absolutely certain that it would.